I'm Madison, 21 years old. The night I told my father I'd been accepted to UCLA's film program, he broke my jaw and swore I'd never leave his control. 4 months later, at his 50th birthday party, I handed him a small silver box. Inside, a USB drive holding photos of my injuries, recordings of his threats, and proof of crimes that brought the FBI to our door. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And truly, thank you for being here. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. The Carters of Highlands Ranch, Colorado. You know, one of those wealthy suburbs outside Denver, where every lawn looks like it belongs on a magazine cover. Our 2-story ranch house with the circular driveway could have been in a real estate brochure. My father, Robert Carter, everyone called him Bob, was a branch manager at Wells Fargo. Respected in the community, member of the church board at First Presbyterian, sponsored the local Little League team. Every 4th of July, he'd set up the biggest fireworks display on our block. My mother, Patricia, Patty to her friends, taught 3rd grade at Cherry Hills Elementary. She organized bake sales, volunteered at the food bank, and always had the perfect casserole ready for neighbors going through tough times. Together, they looked like they'd stepped out of a Christmas card. But here's the thing about perfect families. They don't exist. What you see on the surface is usually hiding something much darker underneath. I do have a few good memories scattered throughout my childhood, like rare gems in a pile of broken glass. My 9th birthday stands out because Dad had just gotten a promotion and was in an unusually good mood. He hired a clown and rented one of those big bounce houses for the backyard. For one day, I felt like a normal kid, with normal parents who actually cared about making me happy. Dad even hugged me that day, something so rare I could count those moments on one hand. Dad even joined in when we played freeze dance, looking ridiculous in his button-down shirt and khakis as he froze mid-motion when the music stopped. Mom took pictures with her old camera, actually smiling instead of just posing. But the memory that really stands out was our camping trip to Rocky Mountain National Park when I was 11. We spent 5 days up there, and for once, Dad left his work phone in the truck, and Mom didn't pack any wine in the cooler. I collected rocks and minerals every morning, and Dad actually helped me build this elaborate campsite that stayed up through 2 thunderstorms. On our last night, Dad taught me how to read the constellations. We lay on our backs on sleeping bags outside the tent, and he pointed out Cassiopeia and the Big Dipper, telling me stories about Greek mythology that I'd never heard before. His voice was gentle, patient, nothing like the sharp, commanding tone he used at home. "See that cluster there, Madison? That's Andromeda. She was chained to a rock, but Perseus saved her." I remember thinking that sounded like the most romantic thing in the world. Mom made s'mores and laughed, really laughed, not that fake social laugh she usually put on for company. The sound was so unfamiliar that I almost didn't recognize it as coming from her. I kept one piece of quartz from that trip, this perfectly clear stone about the size of a quarter that caught sunlight, like it had trapped a rainbow inside. I hid it in my desk drawer back home, physical proof that things could be different, that my parents were capable of being kind. At school, I was always a straight A student. I had to be. Anything less would trigger consequences I learned to avoid at all costs. But my real passion was photography and digital media. While other kids were obsessing over social media selfies, I was documenting everything. The way morning frost looked on our classroom windows, how light hit the mountains during my bus ride to Cherry Creek High School, the expressions on people's faces when they thought nobody was watching. I filled memory cards like other people filled journals, capturing moments that felt real in a life that increasingly felt like performance art. My media arts teacher, Mrs. Sarah Rodriguez, was the first adult who really saw what I was trying to do with my camera. She was this cool woman in her 40s who'd worked as a documentary filmmaker before becoming a teacher. She had this way of looking at my photos that made me feel like they actually mattered. "Madison, your work has emotional depth that's way beyond your years," she told me after I submitted a series called Hidden Stories, photos of ordinary moments that somehow captured the sadness underneath everyday life. "Have you ever thought about pursuing this professionally?" I never showed my photography to my parents. Somehow I knew instinctively that they'd see it as a threat, proof that I had thoughts and dreams beyond their control. Art was impractical, according to Dad, and Mom always said creative people were just avoiding real responsibility. My best friend Tyler Brooks knew fragments of the truth about my home life. We met in 8th grade when his family moved to Colorado after his parents' messy but civilized divorce. Tyler was this tall, skinny kid with glasses who read comic books and didn't care that it wasn't cool. Before I'd fully learned to hide everything, he caught me crying in the bathroom after Dad had thrown away my photography equipment because he deemed it artistic nonsense that was cluttering up the house. Tyler never pushed for details I wasn't ready to share, but he offered quiet support that kept me sane. Sleepovers at his house were like visiting another planet, a place where parents asked their kids about their day and actually listened to the answers, where disagreements were resolved with conversation instead of violence, where "I love you" wasn't followed by conditions and threats. His mom would make us grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight and ask about school projects. His dad, who lived across town, would pick us up for movies and actually let us choose what to see. The contrast to my own home was so stark, it was almost painful to witness what family could look like when people actually respected each other. I dreamed constantly about studying film production at UCLA or USC. Their documentary programs were legendary, and more importantly, they were 1,000 miles from Denver. I imagined walking through Westwood, blending into crowds of students who didn't know my name or my family's reputation. I pictured myself with a real camera, making documentaries about important issues, having professors who cared about my vision instead of my compliance. Late at night, I'd research scholarships on the school computers during lunch, knowing Dad would never willingly pay for me to escape his reach. I memorized application deadlines, essay requirements, portfolio submissions. I had elaborate fantasies about getting that acceptance letter and finally being free to become whoever I wanted to be. My guidance counselor, Ms. Jennifer Walsh, was this kind woman who'd immigrated from Ireland and had this musical accent that made even bad news sound gentle. She'd call me into her office sometimes for check-ins that I knew weren't random. "You know, Madison, you seem to carry a lot of weight on your shoulders for someone your age," she'd say, studying my face carefully. "Is everything all right at home?" "Everything's fine," I'd lie, because what else could I say? That my respected church-going father was a monster behind closed doors. That my sweet teacher mother enabled his abuse. Who would believe me? But Ms. Walsh planted seeds anyway. "UCLA has an excellent film program," she mentioned once, sliding a brochure across her desk. "I think you'd be a strong candidate for their merit scholarships." That brochure lived in my backpack for months, edges worn from being handled so many times. It represented everything I wanted but couldn't have: freedom, creativity, a future where I got to choose my own path instead of having it chosen for me. The first clear sign that my home was different from others came when I was 15. I'd always sensed something was wrong, felt the tension that filled our house like gas waiting for a spark. But that November evening crystallized everything. I brought home my report card, nervous but quietly proud. All A's except for AP Chemistry, where I'd earned a B+. Mr. Peterson was notoriously tough. Half the class had C's, or worse. I thought my parents would be pleased, or at least not upset. I found Dad in his home office at 8:30 p.m., still in his work clothes, surrounded by bank documents and loan applications. The room smelled like leather and his expensive cologne, with that underlying scent of stress sweat that I'd learned to recognize as danger. I handed him the report card with slightly trembling hands, watching his face for any shift in expression. He scanned it slowly, his jaw tightening when he reached that B+. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Without warning, his hand shot out, striking my cheek hard enough to make me stumble backward into his bookshelf. Legal text tumbled to the floor around my feet. "What is this?" he demanded, shaking the paper in my face, his voice that dangerous kind of quiet that was somehow worse than yelling. "You think mediocrity is acceptable in this house? You think the Carters settle for anything less than excellence?" My cheek burned where he'd hit me, but the shock was worse than the pain. He'd never actually struck me before. Intimidated, yes. Grabbed my arm too hard, pushed me, but never an actual slap. Mom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. For a split second, I thought she might defend me, might show some maternal instinct. Instead, she just shook her head like I'd disappointed her personally. "You need to do better, Madison. Don't disappoint your father like this again." That night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to make any sound that might bring Dad back upstairs. It wasn't the physical pain that hurt most. It was realizing that my mother would never protect me. In that moment, I understood I was completely alone in my own home. The control escalated gradually after that incident, like a noose tightening one loop at a time. Dad started checking my phone regularly, reading every text message and monitoring my calls. He knew my passwords because he'd demanded them for my safety. He installed parental controls that sent alerts to his phone about every website I visited, every app I downloaded. My curfew became non-negotiable: 5 p.m. on weekdays, 7 on weekends, no exceptions. He began vetting my friends, deciding who was suitable for a Carter to associate with. Tyler made the cut because his grades were good and his mom was a nurse. Respectable profession, according to Dad. But several other friends were suddenly off limits for various reasons that boiled down to Dad's need to control every aspect of my social life. The Johnson girl comes from a broken home, he'd say about my friend Ashley, whose parents were divorced. Bad influence. I don't want you picking up their dysfunction. One particularly humiliating incident happened during a study group at Tyler's house in December. 5 of us were preparing for finals, textbooks, and notes spread across their dining room table. Tyler's mom had made hot chocolate and cookies, and for 2 hours, I felt almost normal. Without warning, Dad appeared at their front door at 8:15 p.m. He'd tracked my phone's location and decided I needed to come home immediately, even though I'd told him exactly where I'd be and my curfew wasn't until 9. Tyler's mom tried to smooth things over. "Mr. Carter, the kids are really making good progress on their chemistry project. Maybe Madison could stay until 9 as planned." "Madison needs to come home now," Dad said, in that tone that brooked no argument. "Family obligations." My classmates stared in awkward silence as I gathered my things, my face burning with shame. Jessica Chen shot me a sympathetic look, but what could she say? Alex Morrison just stared at his textbook like he wished he could disappear. "I told you to ask permission for any activities," Dad said in the car, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Study groups are a waste of time. Kids just gossip and get distracted." "But Dad, we were actually studying. Mr. Peterson assigned us to work together on the project," I tried to explain, my voice small. "Don't talk back to me," he snapped. "Your grades are your responsibility alone. I don't want to hear about group projects or study partners. You'll study at home where I can monitor your progress." That night, I started my secret journal. I stole a notebook from school supplies and carefully pried up a loose floorboard under my bed to create a hiding spot. In those pages, I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. Every hurt, every fear, every small and large injustice. The journal became my only confidant, the one place I could be completely honest about what my life was really like. I became skilled at lying, creating elaborate cover stories to explain why I couldn't attend birthday parties or school events. I learned to smile convincingly while saying I couldn't come to social events because of family obligations, never revealing that the obligation was Dad's decree that I stay home and focus on what matters. I perfected wearing long sleeves in warm weather to cover finger-shaped bruises on my arms. I became an expert with concealer, blending it carefully over any mark that might raise questions. I became an actress, playing the role of normal teenager so well that sometimes I almost believed it myself. The hypervigilance started around this time too. I developed an almost supernatural awareness of Dad's moods, learning to read the smallest signs, the way he placed his keys on the counter when he came home from work. Gentle meant he'd had a good day. A sharp clatter meant danger. The rhythm of his footsteps on the stairs, the tone he used answering work calls, even how he chewed his food at dinner, all of it told me whether I needed to make myself scarce or could risk being visible. It was exhausting, this constant monitoring of someone else's emotional temperature, but it was necessary for survival, and I got very good at it. I could predict his explosions sometimes hours before they happened, reading micro-expressions and body language like a meteorologist tracking storm systems. Mom's behavior became increasingly erratic during this period. Some days she'd be almost kind, slipping me an extra $20 or warning me with a look that Dad was in a dangerous mood. Other days she seemed to resent my very existence, criticizing everything from my posture to how I breathed, as though my presence was an affront to her carefully maintained world. I never knew which version of her I'd encounter from one day to the next. The uncertainty was almost worse than Dad's consistent hostility, because at least with him, I knew what to expect. One night during spring of sophomore year, I woke to the sound of shouting from my parents' bedroom. This wasn't unusual, they fought regularly, but something about the intensity made me creep to my door and listen through the thin walls of our house. I could hear Mom sobbing and Dad's low, threatening voice saying things I couldn't quite make out. Then there was a sharp sound like a slap, followed by Mom's crying becoming muffled, like she was pressing her face into a pillow. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just failing to protect me. She was trapped too, in her own way. It didn't excuse her enabling behavior or her occasional participation in my emotional abuse, but it helped me understand why she sometimes looked at me with what I thought was hatred, but might have been envy. Maybe she resented that I was young enough to still dream of escape, while she felt too old, too financially dependent, too scared to imagine a different life. This revelation brought a new dimension to my fear. If Mom, an adult with presumably more resources and options than I had, couldn't escape this situation, what hope did I have? But it also planted a seed of determination. I started paying attention differently, not just to Dad's moods, but to the dynamics between my parents. I began to see the subtle ways he controlled her too, monitoring her spending, criticizing her appearance, isolating her from friends he deemed bad influences. Around this time, I made a discovery that would change everything. I was looking for a stapler in Dad's home office, a room I was generally forbidden to enter without permission. In a drawer that was partially open, I saw a hotel receipt tucked between some bank documents. This alone wasn't unusual since Dad traveled for work, but the dates caught my attention. He'd claimed to be in Chicago that weekend for a banking conference, but the hotel was the downtown Denver Marriott, less than 30 minutes from our house. The receipt showed charges for 2 guests, room service for 2, and a bottle of champagne that cost more than my monthly allowance. Dad was having an affair. The realization hit me like cold water, not because I had any reverence for my parents' toxic marriage, but because it was a secret I now possessed. Information that could potentially be dangerous if he ever suspected I knew, but also leverage I'd never had before. I carefully replaced the receipt exactly as I'd found it and left the office, my heart pounding. This knowledge felt like a time bomb in my brain. I had no immediate plans to use it, but its very existence gave me a tiny sense of power in a situation where I'd been completely powerless. That night, I added this information to my journal, hiding it in my secret spot with extra care. It wasn't so much ammunition as it was insurance, a small piece of leverage that might someday matter. I started documenting everything more systematically after that. I began carrying a small digital voice recorder that Tyler had given me for a school project, keeping it in my pocket to capture Dad's threats and explosive outbursts. The first time I played back a recording of him screaming that he'd teach me some real respect if I kept running my mouth, I was shocked by how his voice sounded from an objective perspective. Had I really been living with this level of hostility for so long that it seemed normal? I also started researching domestic violence resources online, using the computers at school during lunch breaks to avoid leaving digital traces at home. I learned terms like emotional abuse and financial control that gave names to things I'd experienced but couldn't articulate. I read stories from other survivors that made me feel less alone and less crazy. Junior year brought college application pressure that intensified everything. Dad had very specific ideas about my future that had nothing to do with what I wanted. "You'll apply to University of Colorado Boulder," he announced one evening at dinner, not even phrasing it as a question. "Business administration track. You can live at home and commute. No need for dorm expenses, and I can make sure you stay focused on your studies." My stomach dropped. No UCLA, no film school, no escape. Just 4 more years of this, followed by a career in business that would probably involve Dad finding me a suitable job at his bank or with one of his connections. "But Dad, I've been thinking about documentary programs," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been working on photography, and Mrs. Rodriguez thinks I have real potential." His face darkened immediately. "Photography? Liberal arts nonsense. No daughter of mine is wasting money on such garbage. Business is a respectable field with actual earning potential." "Bob's right, Madison," Mom chimed in, always the loyal echo. "Think practically. Art is for people who couldn't get into real programs." I should have backed down then. Experience had taught me that disagreement only led to pain. But something about having the next 4 years of my life decided without my input made something snap inside me. I don't want to study business, I said, my voice stronger than intended. I want to make documentaries. I want to go to California. I've been researching scholarships so it wouldn't cost you anything. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad set down his fork with deliberate slowness, a gesture I'd learned to fear like a tornado siren. Go to your room, he said quietly. We'll discuss your attitude adjustment later. Later came 3 hours after Mom had gone to bed, with her nightly combination of prescription pills and wine. He entered my room without knocking, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded more threatening than a slam would have. The discussion that followed left me with bruised ribs and a split lip. I learned that he'd found scholarship applications I'd hidden in my camera bag. I learned that defiance wouldn't be tolerated under any circumstances. I learned that dreams were luxuries I wasn't entitled to, as long as I lived under his roof. The next morning, Mom glanced at my swollen face over breakfast, but said nothing. She just pushed the cereal box toward me and asked if I wanted orange juice, like my split lip was as unremarkable as a pimple. I applied concealer carefully before school, an art I'd unfortunately perfected over the previous 2 years. But I also made a decision that morning. I couldn't wait until I was 18 to start planning my escape. The timeline had to move up. The college application season of junior year became a battleground, where my desperate desire for independence clashed directly with Dad's iron determination to control my future. Every conversation about my post-graduation plans felt like walking through a minefield. Mrs. Rodriguez had been helping me secretly research film programs and scholarship opportunities during lunch periods and after school. She never asked directly about my home situation, but I could tell she sensed something was wrong. Teachers have a sixth sense about students who are struggling with more than just academics. Madison, I've been looking into some programs I think would be perfect for you, she said one day after media arts class, sliding a folder across her desk. UCLA, USC, even some East Coast schools with amazing documentary programs. Your portfolio is strong enough for merit scholarships. I felt a surge of hope and terror simultaneously. These were the exact programs I'd been dreaming about, but I knew Dad would never allow me to apply, let alone attend. Mrs. Rodriguez, I appreciate this, but my parents have already decided I'm studying business at CU Boulder. She studied my face carefully. What do you want to study, Madison? It was such a simple question, but no adult had ever asked me that before. In my family, want was a 4-letter word. I want to make documentaries, I whispered, like it was a dangerous secret. Then that's what you should do. You're 17, old enough to have input into your own future. If only she knew how little input I was allowed to have about anything. The breaking point came in March, when I finally worked up the courage to show Dad some of my photography work. I'd won second place in a statewide high school arts competition, and Mrs. Rodriguez had suggested that might open doors for college applications. I waited until he was in a relatively good mood. The bank had just landed a major commercial client, and he'd been almost cheerful at dinner. I knocked on his office door and asked if I could show him something. What is it? He asked, not looking up from his computer. I won an award for my photography. I thought maybe you'd like to see the piece. He sighed and gestured for me to come in. I showed him the photo series I'd titled Hidden Truths, images of everyday moments that revealed deeper emotions underneath. There was a shot of an elderly man feeding pigeons with tears in his eyes, a mother watching her children play while holding divorce papers, a teenager sitting alone in a crowded cafeteria. Dad looked through them with increasing irritation. This is what you've been wasting time on. Depressing pictures of random people? They're not random. They're about finding the real story behind what people show the world. The real story, he repeated mockingly. Madison, this is exactly the kind of impractical nonsense I'm talking about. These pictures don't solve problems or create value. They just wallow in negativity. But I won second place in the state competition. Mrs. Rodriguez says I could get into really good film programs with work like this. His expression shifted from annoyance to something much darker. Mrs. Rodriguez, I should have known that woman was filling your head with unrealistic ideas. Artists don't make real livings, Madison. They struggle and live in poverty while chasing fantasies. But what if I could make it work? What if I could get scholarships and— Enough. His voice cut through my words like a blade. We've already discussed your future. You'll study business, period. I won't hear another word about this photography hobby. It's not a hobby, Dad. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love. The moment the word love left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Dad's face went completely still in that way that meant an explosion was coming. Love, he said slowly. You think love pays bills? You think love provides security? You think your feelings matter more than practical reality? He stood up from his desk, and I instinctively took a step backward. You're 17 years old, Madison. You don't know anything about love or life or what it takes to survive in this world. You live in my house, eat my food, and wear clothes I pay for. Until you're supporting yourself, you'll do what I tell you to do. But I'll be 18 soon. I should have some say in my own future. That's when he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. 18 doesn't make you an adult. Moving out of my house and paying your own bills makes you an adult. Until then, you're still my responsibility, and I won't watch you throw your life away on artistic nonsense. He pulled me closer, his grip tightening. And if I hear that Rodriguez woman is still encouraging this fantasy, I'll have a conversation with her principal about teachers who overstep their boundaries. The threat was clear. If I kept pursuing this, he'd find a way to get Mrs. Rodriguez in trouble, maybe even cost her job. I couldn't let that happen to the one adult who believed in me. I understand, I said quietly, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. Good. Now throw these pictures away and focus on your real future. That night, I hid the photos instead of throwing them away, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I started seriously considering that I might have to choose between my dreams and my safety. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which one mattered more. Senior year arrived with the weight of finality pressing down on everything. College application deadlines loomed like storm clouds, and Dad's control over my future felt more suffocating than ever. He'd already submitted my enrollment paperwork to University of Colorado Boulder without my input, treating my acceptance as a foregone conclusion. But Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't given up on me. During the first week of school, she pulled me aside after class with news that would change everything. Madison, I've been in contact with UCLA's film department. They have a special scholarship program for students facing unusual circumstances. If you're interested, I can help you put together an application packet. My heart leaped and sank simultaneously. The thought of UCLA felt like someone offering water to a person dying of thirst, but I knew Dad would never allow it. Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't understand. Your parents don't have to know until you're accepted, she said gently. You're 18 in a few months. You have the right to apply to colleges without their permission. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. Secret applications felt like the ultimate rebellion, but also like my only chance at freedom. Over the next few months, Mrs. Rodriguez and I worked together during lunch periods and after school to complete applications, not just to UCLA, but to USC and several other film programs. We used her address for correspondence, and I opened a secret email account at the library to communicate with admissions offices. The application essays were the hardest part. How do you write about overcoming adversity without revealing that your own parents are the adversity? I wrote carefully crafted pieces about finding my voice through visual storytelling and using art to explore difficult truths, dancing around the reality of my home life without directly exposing it. By February, I'd submitted 6 applications and was living in a constant state of anxiety. Every time Dad looked at me suspiciously, I wondered if he'd somehow discovered what I'd done. Every time the phone rang, I worried it was a college calling the house instead of Mrs. Rodriguez's number. Then, in March, it happened. I was in study hall when Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the door with a note for me to come to her classroom. She was trying to look casual, but I could see excitement barely contained beneath her professional demeanor. Madison, she said, once we were alone. You need to sit down. She handed me an envelope with the UCLA logo, and I knew before opening it what it contained. The word congratulations seemed to jump off the page as I read about my acceptance into their documentary film program, with a merit scholarship that would cover full tuition and partial living expenses. I stared at the letter, reading it 3 times to make sure it was real. UCLA wanted me. Not the version of me my parents were trying to create, but the real me, the photographer, the storyteller, the girl who saw deeper truths behind surface appearances. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is incredible, but nothing, she said firmly. This is your chance, Madison. This is your future calling. For 3 weeks, I carried the secret of my acceptance like a live wire in my chest. I'd been accepted to my dream school with a scholarship that would make it financially possible. All I had to do was find the courage to tell my parents. The breaking point came during a family dinner in late March. Dad was discussing summer plans, specifically a job he'd arranged for me at his bank to get me started in the business world. I'll have you working with our loan officers, he said, cutting into his steak with satisfaction. Good experience before you start your business classes in the fall. Mom nodded approvingly. Such a smart way to get Madison started on the right path. Something about the way they discussed my life like I wasn't even there, like my future was just another business transaction to be managed, made the words tumble out before I could stop them. Actually, I need to tell you both something. They looked up with identical expressions of mild curiosity. I've been accepted to UCLA, I said simply. Film production program, full scholarship. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was the silence of a world ending. Dad set down his fork with deliberate control. What did you say? I applied to film schools. I got into UCLA with a scholarship. I'm 18 now. I can make my own decisions about college. The color drained from his face, then returned as deep red fury. How dare you go behind my back? Who helped you? That Rodriguez woman? It doesn't matter who helped me. What matters is that I got in. This is my chance to study what I actually want to study. Like hell it is. His voice was dangerously quiet now. Not while you live under my roof? Then I'll move out. And that's when everything exploded. Dad lunged across the table, his fist connecting with my jaw with a sickening crack that I felt through my entire skull. I dropped to the floor, tasting blood immediately, seeing stars that had nothing to do with the ones Dad had shown me during our camping trip years before. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Mom's footsteps, and for a moment I thought she was coming to help me. Instead, she looked down at me bleeding on our dining room floor and laughed. Now you'll learn to keep that gutter mouth shut. For the next 2 weeks, I existed in a fog of pain and absolute clarity. My jaw was definitely broken. I could feel the misalignment when I tried to speak, and eating anything solid was impossible. Dad refused to take me to a hospital, claiming I'd fallen down the stairs and just needed time to heal. Mom provided over-the-counter pain medication that barely touched the agony, but somehow, the physical pain sharpened my thinking instead of clouding it. During those painful days of recovery, surviving on liquids through a straw, I formulated my plan with methodical precision. I'd been dreaming of escape for years, but always with vague timelines and uncertain methods. Now I had a definite deadline, an absolute conviction. I would never spend another night in this house once my jaw healed enough to execute my plan. Using an old digital camera I found in our storage closet, I documented my injuries daily, creating a visual timeline of my healing process. Each photo was dated and time-stamped, showing the progression from severe swelling and bruising to the gradual healing that left my jaw slightly crooked. I wrote detailed accounts of the assault and previous abuse in a new journal, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice on my bookshelf, a book I knew my parents would never touch. The voice recorder Tyler had given me became my constant companion. I carried it everywhere, capturing Dad's threats and Mom's enabling comments. The first time I played back a recording of Dad saying he'd break more than my jaw next time if I kept running my mouth, I was shocked by how his voice sounded from an objective perspective. This was evidence, real, undeniable proof of what was happening in our perfect suburban home. 3 weeks after the assault, when I could speak without excruciating pain, I made a secret visit to Mrs. Rodriguez. School was out for summer, but she taught photography workshops at the community center on Tuesday afternoons. I waited until she was alone after her last class. "Madison," she exclaimed when she saw me. Then her expression shifted to horror as she took in my still healing face. "My God, what happened to you?" For the first time in my life, I told someone the complete truth. The words poured out, halting at first, Then, in a rush that couldn't be contained, I told her about the years of control, the escalating violence, the broken jaw, everything. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each revelation. I suspected something was wrong, she said softly when I finished. Your photography always had this undercurrent of pain that seemed too real to be just artistic vision. But I never imagined it was this severe. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid no one would believe me. Afraid of what would happen if someone tried to help but failed. Afraid he'd take it out on you too. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me connect with Sarah Martinez, a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases and had herself escaped an abusive marriage in her 20s. Sarah agreed to meet me secretly at the Denver Public Library, reviewing my evidence and outlining my options. Your documentation is excellent, she told me during our first meeting, examining the photographs and recordings with professional assessment. Since you're 18, you have more options than a minor would. We can file for a restraining order immediately and get you into emergency housing. Not yet, I said. I need more time to prepare. Once I make this move, I can never go back. I need to be completely ready, and I need to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Sarah understood. She helped me create a detailed safety plan and connected me with resources for abuse survivors. She also discovered something that would prove crucial while researching my father's background. Robert Carter has been under federal investigation for bank fraud, she revealed during our third meeting. Misappropriation of client funds, conflicts of interest, falsified loan documents. It's been kept quiet, but there's a substantial case building against him. This could explain his escalating violence. Men like your father often become more dangerous when they feel their control slipping in other areas of their lives. This information was both terrifying and strategically useful. If Dad was already under federal scrutiny, my allegations might find more receptive ears among law enforcement. But it also meant he was potentially more volatile and dangerous than ever. Through Mrs. Rodriguez's network, I secured an emergency late admission to UCLA's film program, complete with a special circumstances scholarship for students in crisis situations. My documentation of abuse, combined with my academic record and portfolio, convinced the admissions committee to hold a spot for me in the fall semester. Tyler became my operational partner during this preparation phase. Using library computers and his family's phone, we coordinated the logistics of my escape. His family offered their guest room as a temporary safe house, and Tyler began secretly storing my most important possessions at his home. Each time I visited the library for research, I'd bring a small bag of irreplaceable items: my journals, the quartz crystal from our camping trip, my best photography equipment, passing them to Tyler in sections where security cameras had blind spots. The date for my confrontation crystallized when I overheard my parents discussing Dad's 50th birthday party. They planned to host a major celebration at our house on July 20th, inviting colleagues from Wells Fargo, friends from church, extended family, and prominent community members. It would be the perfect opportunity. With witnesses present whose opinions Dad valued, he couldn't react with his usual violence without destroying his carefully constructed public image. As the date approached, I finalized every detail with military precision. Sarah prepared legal documents, ready to file for restraining orders and criminal charges the moment I was safely away from the house. My belongings were already hidden at Tyler's home. My evidence was duplicated and stored in multiple secure locations, some with Sarah, some with Mrs. Rodriguez, some in a safety deposit box I'd opened with money from a part-time job Dad didn't know about. Mrs. Rodriguez arranged for her sister to drive me to Denver International Airport the day after the confrontation, with a plane ticket to Los Angeles already purchased and waiting. But the centerpiece of my plan was the presentation I'd been working on for weeks, a carefully compiled digital exposé of my father's true nature, designed for maximum impact in front of the audience that mattered most to him. Photos, audio recordings, documentation of his affair, even some financial records I'd photographed from his office that suggested the federal investigation was more serious than I'd realized. All the pieces were finally in place. The night before the party, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. For the first time in my life, I was about to take complete control of my narrative. Tomorrow, the whole world would see exactly who Robert Carter really was behind his perfect facade. I was ready to detonate everything. The morning of Dad's 50th birthday arrived with typical Colorado sunshine, the kind of perfect weather that made our neighborhood look like a movie set. Mom spent the morning in full hostess mode, directing the catering staff, arranging elaborate flower displays, and ensuring every detail met her exacting standards for what she called the party of the decade. Dad was unusually cheerful, floating through the house in his silk robe, occasionally stopping to admire the decorations or sample appetizers. He seemed genuinely excited about celebrating with all the people whose opinions mattered to him. Bank executives, city council members, church leadership, successful neighbors who form the core of Denver's suburban elite. "This is going to be quite a party," he said to Mom over lunch, scrolling through the guest list on his phone. David Wilson confirmed he's coming, and Pastor Mitchell said he's bringing his wife. Even the Hendersons from the country club are driving down from Aspen. I moved through the house like a ghost, performing assigned tasks with mechanical precision while mentally rehearsing every step of what was about to unfold. I helped arrange chairs, set up the sound system, and answered the door for delivery people, all while carrying the USB drive in my pocket like a live grenade. By 6 o'clock, guests began arriving in a parade of luxury cars and designer outfits. I watched from my bedroom window as Dad's colleagues from Wells Fargo emerged from their BMWs and Mercedes, their wives perfectly coiffed and dressed for the kind of party that would be talked about for months. Pastor Mitchell arrived with the church board members, followed by neighbors I recognized from community events and charity galas. I wore the navy blue dress Mom had selected for me, conservative and appropriate for a banker's daughter. My hair was arranged to partially cover the faint scar along my jawline, where it had healed slightly crooked. A permanent reminder of that night in March, but also a badge of survival. Dinner progressed through multiple courses of catered perfection. Dad held court at the head of our dining room table, which had been extended with additional leaves to accommodate 24 guests. He regaled everyone with stories from his banking career, his recent golf games, and his pride in raising such a well-behaved, academically successful daughter. "Madison's going to study business at CU Boulder in the fall," he announced during the main course, raising his wine glass toward me. Following in the family tradition of practical decision-making, I smiled and nodded, playing my role perfectly while inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. In less than an hour, everything these people believed about Robert Carter would be destroyed forever. After dinner, the party moved to our living room for cake and the gift opening ceremony. Mom had orchestrated this like a royal celebration, with Dad seated in his favorite leather armchair, while guests arranged themselves around the room with coffee and dessert. The presents reflected his status and relationships. Expensive scotch from bank clients, custom golf accessories from neighbors, leather-bound books from church friends, a Rolex from Mom that probably cost more than most people's cars. Dad opened each gift with practiced gratitude, making gracious comments about the thoughtfulness of each selection. I waited until he'd opened everything else, until the pile of discarded wrapping paper reached its peak and guests were beginning to relax into the comfortable post-dinner satisfaction of a successful social event. "I have something for you too, Dad," I said, stepping forward with the small wrapped box I'd been carrying. The room fell into polite attention as Dad looked genuinely surprised. I'd never shown initiative in gift-giving before, always just signing my name to whatever Mom had purchased on my behalf. "Well, this is unexpected," he said with that politician's smile, though I caught the slight wariness in his eyes. What could my daughter have gotten her old man? I handed him the silver-wrapped package, noting how Jennifer Hayes from his office was sitting with her husband just 10 feet away, both of them completely unaware that I knew about their ongoing affair. Dad opened the box carefully, revealing the USB drive nestled in tissue paper. "A flash drive," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "It contains some memories I thought you might want to share with everyone," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Home movies, you could say. Would you like to see them?" Before he could refuse, I walked to our entertainment center, where the large-screen TV was connected to our computer system. "I already set everything up earlier," I said, inserting the drive and navigating to the first file while feeling every eye in the room watching my movements. The screen filled with my battered face from the night he broke my jaw. Swollen eyes, split lips, jaw visibly misaligned, dated just 4 months earlier. The collective gasp from 24 guests seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Dad leaped from his chair, lunging toward the TV, but froze as the next image appeared. Another photo showing the progression of my injuries over days, each one time-stamped and dated, creating an undeniable timeline of healing. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking as his carefully maintained composure began to shatter. All pretense of the jovial birthday boy evaporated, replaced by the cold fury I knew so well. "Just sharing some family memories, Dad," I said calmly, clicking to the next file. His own voice filled the room through our surround sound system, a recording from a week after the assault. "Try to tell anyone about your little accident and you won't survive the next one. Do you understand me, you worthless little bitch? The next time you disrespect me, I'll put you in the hospital." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom had gone deathly pale, gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Dad's face cycled through confusion, rage, and something approaching panic as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. "You manipulative little liar," he snarled, starting toward me with his hands raised. "Turn that off right now." "Bob, what is going on here?" David Wilson, the bank president, stood up slowly, his voice filled with shock and growing horror. "Nothing," Dad snapped, his public mask slipping completely. "Doctored photos, edited recordings, teenage rebellion taken too far." "Is that why you broke my jaw when I told you I wanted to study film instead of business?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "Because I was being rebellious?" I clicked to the next section of my presentation, financial documents I'd photographed from his office, showing unusual transfers and account manipulations that aligned perfectly with the federal investigation Sarah had discovered. "And here are some of Dad's creative accounting practices at the bank," I continued conversationally. "Though I'm sure the FBI investigators already have copies of these." David Wilson pulled out his phone immediately, probably calling bank security or federal contacts. Several other guests were reaching for their own phones, some filming, others likely calling lawyers or spouses. But I wasn't finished. The final section of my presentation featured hotel receipts, dinner charges, and credit card statements documenting Dad's affair with Jennifer Hayes, complete with dates when he'd claimed to be traveling for business, but was actually meeting her at local hotels. Jennifer's face went white as her own husband's expression shifted from confusion to recognition to fury. "You son of a bitch," Michael Hayes said quietly, standing up and walking toward the door. "Jennifer, we're leaving, now." Before he could respond to this latest humiliation, the doorbell rang with perfect timing. I walked calmly to the front door and opened it to reveal 2 FBI agents and a local police officer standing on our perfect suburban porch. "Good evening," the lead agent said, showing her badge. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We're here to execute a search warrant for Robert Carter in connection with ongoing bank fraud investigations." "That would be my father," I said, stepping back to allow them entry. "He's right inside with about 20 witnesses." What followed was the systematic destruction of everything Robert Carter had built over 5 decades. He was arrested in front of his colleagues, handcuffed in his own living room, while his birthday cake sat melting on the dining room table. The bank president immediately suspended him pending investigation. The pastor announced that the church board would be holding an emergency meeting about his leadership position. As they led him toward the police car, Dad looked back at me one final time. "You've destroyed this family," he said, his voice filled with venom. "No, Dad," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "You destroyed it. I just made sure everyone could see what you really are." The guests departed in shocked silence, many of them talking in urgent whispers about lawyers and damage control. Mom locked herself in her bedroom with a bottle of wine, the sound of breaking glass suggesting she was taking the news about as well as expected. I stood in our empty living room, surrounded by abandoned cake plates and discarded gift wrap, feeling strangely peaceful. Tomorrow I would fly to Los Angeles to start my new life. Tonight, I was finally free. The immediate aftermath unfolded like dominoes, falling in exactly the sequence I'd planned, yet somehow more dramatically than I'd ever imagined. Within 48 hours, Dad was formally charged with domestic violence, assault with intent to cause bodily harm, bank fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. The FBI's investigation into his financial crimes had been building for months. and my public exposure provided the final push they needed to move forward with arrests. The local news picked up the story within a week. Respected Denver banker arrested on multiple charges following daughter's public accusations. They couldn't use my name because I was technically still a minor when most of the abuse occurred, but the story made regional headlines anyway. The contrast between Dad's public persona and private reality was exactly the kind of narrative that captivated audiences. Mom had what her doctors diplomatically called a nervous breakdown 3 days after the party. She admitted herself to a private treatment facility in Scottsdale, ostensibly for alcohol dependency, but really because she couldn't face the social aftermath of everything that had been revealed. Our house went up for sale within a month. She needed money for legal fees and treatment, and couldn't bear to live with the memories anymore. I spent the summer at Tyler's house, whose family treated me with the kind of gentle kindness I'd never experienced from relatives. His mom made sure I ate regularly and got proper medical attention for my jaw, which required minor surgery to correct the alignment issues. His dad, who worked as a high school counselor, helped me process the trauma without making me feel like a victim who needed rescuing. The settlement from the civil case against Dad came through faster than Sarah Martinez had expected, partly because his assets were being seized anyway for restitution to his banking victims, and partly because he wanted to avoid any additional public proceedings. The amount was substantial enough to pay for college and provide a foundation for independent living. UCLA welcomed me with exactly the kind of support system I'd dreamed about. The film department had dealt with students from traumatic backgrounds before, and they connected me with counseling services, peer support groups, and professors who understood that creativity often emerges from surviving difficult circumstances. My first documentary project, created during spring semester of freshman year, explored how domestic violence hides behind successful public personas. I interviewed other survivors whose abusers had been pillars of their communities: a judge, a pastor, a police chief. The film won our school's student documentary competition and was screened at several film festivals focused on social justice issues. But perhaps more importantly, it helped other students at UCLA recognize signs of abuse in their own relationships or families. After each screening, people would approach me with their own stories, many of them seeking resources or just wanting to know they weren't alone. The healing journey wasn't linear or easy. There were nights I woke up drenched in sweat, phantom sensations of Dad's hands around my throat so real, I had to turn on all the lights and remind myself he was in federal prison in Colorado, serving a 6-year sentence. There were days when a raised voice in the hallway or unexpected touch would send me spiraling into panic attacks that left me shaking and disoriented. But I was getting better, piece by piece, day by day. The trauma therapist I saw weekly at UCLA's counseling center helped me understand that recovery wasn't about forgetting or necessarily forgiving, but about reclaiming my life from the shadow of abuse. Trauma changes the brain, Dr. Patricia Kim explained during one of our sessions, but so does healing. Every time you make a choice for yourself, every time you speak your truth, you're literally rewiring neural pathways that were formed during years of survival mode. The support group for family violence survivors became another cornerstone of my healing. Twice a month, I sat in a circle with men and women whose stories echoed parts of mine, whose eyes held the same mixture of pain and determination. We shared strategies for managing flashbacks, celebrated small victories like sleeping through the night or speaking up in class, and reminded each other that we weren't defined by what had been done to us. Mom wrote to me once during her treatment program, a letter that arrived 6 months after I'd started at UCLA. "I failed you in every way a mother could fail a child," she wrote in handwriting that looked frail and uncertain. "I can't ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm trying to understand how I became the kind of woman who would watch her husband hurt her child and do nothing. I don't recognize that person anymore, and I never want to be her again." I read the letter several times before placing it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond, wasn't sure if I ever would be. Dr. Kim assured me this was normal, that reconciliation, if it ever happened, would need to come on my timeline, not anyone else's. "Your only obligation right now is to your own healing," she reminded me, not to anyone else's expectations or timeline for forgiveness. By the end of my sophomore year, I'd found my rhythm in Los Angeles. I had friends who knew my story and supported my journey. I was dating Sam Chen, a cinematography student who understood that some days I needed space, and other days I needed gentle reminding that I was safe. I had started a small foundation to provide emergency funds for young adults escaping abusive homes, naming it Clear Voice to emphasize that surviving abuse was not the end of anyone's story. Sitting here today in my apartment near UCLA, finishing my junior year and preparing for an internship with a documentary production company that focuses on social justice issues, I can honestly say that breaking free was the best decision I ever made. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, it cost me the only family I'd ever known. But it gave me something infinitely more valuable: the right to define my own life. The scars are still there, visible and invisible. My jaw clicks sometimes when I eat, a permanent reminder of that night in March. I still have moments when unexpected sounds or situations trigger memories that send my heart racing. But I also have strength I never knew I possessed. Wisdom earned through surviving the worst kind of betrayal, and a voice that I've learned to use fearlessly. The true power I've discovered isn't in controlling others the way Dad tried to do. It's in reclaiming control of your own narrative. It's not about silencing people who threaten you, but about finding and using your own voice even when it shakes. It's not about creating fear, but about overcoming it and helping others do the same. If you're watching this and recognizing parts of your own story, please know that you're not alone. If someone in your life is trying to convince you that their version of love requires your silence, your compliance, or your dreams as payment, that's not love. That's control, and you deserve so much better. Document everything. Keep records. Find trusted adults who will believe you. And remember that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had? Have you ever had to choose between safety and dreams, or rebuild your life from nothing? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them might help someone else who's still trapped in their own version of my story. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward finding your own way out. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233, or you can text START to 88788. There are people who want to help, and you deserve to be safe. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, your past doesn't have to determine your future. You have the power to write your own next chapter. The people who try to silence you are afraid of your voice because they know how powerful it is. Don't let them win. Keep talking. Keep fighting. Keep believing that you deserve better, because you do. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you matter. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep shining your light. The world needs it.